And we're live. Welcome to episode 15 of Tetrate Tech Talks. My name is Eitan Suez, and the Tetrate Tech Talks are a weekly live stream where we feature a conversation with a guest and discuss technology, do technical demonstrations, and much more. Today is Friday, July the 15th. The time is 9 a.m. Pacific time, noon Eastern. And I am coming to you from Austin, Texas, Central Time. The local time is 11 a.m. And I'm very happy to have you on our Tetrate Tech Talks. Tetrate is the enterprise service mesh company, and much of our focus is on technologies such as Envoy, Istio, Kubernetes, and more. So if this is the first time you're joining us on the program, I'd like to welcome you. If you're a repeat visitor, I would like to say thank you for coming on and listening to our Tech Talks. We love to sort of geek out over this technology. We started these streams in April, and we typically run every Friday. All right, so let me show you our landing page as I normally do, the Tetrate Tech Talks landing page. And the URL to this landing page, by the way, is in the description to the live stream. But I'll go ahead and pop it up here on the screen as well. And I'll make myself a little bit smaller, and we'll get going with our episode in just a minute. Make the font size a little bit bigger. Here we go. And we'll dive right into episode 15, and we'll talk about a little bit of front matter. So again, if you're new to our live stream, I'd like to welcome you and invite you to say hello in the comments and tell us where you're coming from. Okay. And the objectives of these Tech Talks is really learning, sharing knowledge, building community, getting to know technology. We love talking about Istio and Envoy and other technologies, but also to get to know the people behind these tools and systems. And in the process, of course, to have a great deal of fun. So let's carry on. Just to catch you up on what we've been up to. If you've missed our previous episodes, last week we did a Tetrand profile, which is part of a series where we expose Tetrands, which is what we call ourselves, employees of the company Tetrate, and share with you, the community, a little bit of what we're working on, what we do, and how we sort of interface to the wider service mesh technology and community. The week before, we did an episode on learning Istio from the inside. That was our first episode where we sort of showed the basics of getting a development environment set up. And we're going to probably follow it up with another episode in August where we're going to invite one of our engineers to give us an overview of sort of working with the Istio code base. But without further ado, our episode is another Tetrand profile. We have the pleasure of having with us Michael Acostamadiedo. Michael is a cloud-native architect with Tetrate. He works for our customer success organization. And in this capacity, Michael works with and assists our clients with adoption of service mesh technology and solving all kinds of interesting problems. And I'd like to bring Michael on at this point and begin our conversation. What actually, well, I'm a little bit too early in telling you exactly the reason why I have Michael on. He's got a lot of tech stuff he's going to share with us. So let me add him to the stream. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for being with us. I really appreciate having you. And the first question I always like to ask is to give you a chance to properly introduce yourself, a little bit about your professional background and what you do at Tetrate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And you pretty much said it all already. My name is Michael Acostamadiedo. I'm a solution architect at Tetrate, and I'm part of the customer success organization. I'm really passionate about service mesh and cloud technologies. And I've been pretty much involved in anything that is related with API gateways and service mesh and things like that for a while. It really is my passion.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, I like to think that we're all here at Tetrate on our own service mesh journey. which we'll have, I guess, more
Absolutely.
to talk about. I definitely have been delighted with everything I've been learning about service meshes in the process of doing these tech talks and more. How long have you been with Tetrate? Just curious to know.
I've been with Tetrate about 6 months. Before that, I was part of Red Hat. I was an architect there. And I just think for service mesh, you just never stop learning, right? It's evolving so rapidly that you just need to be on top and keep on learning the new things that are coming out every day.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. Every time I think that I've got a handle on things, I learn something new or discover something new. And this episode actually is not an exception to that rule. I learned a great deal about egress. We'll talk about it in just a minute in the process of learning about and reading your blog post. So let me maybe start with, how I guess Istio or service meshes, there are really two main components. There's the mesh itself, and then there's what we call the edge. And the edge, when people think of the edge, they immediately gravitate to ingress, right? They think about, okay, how do I allow my traffic in? And I guess that's natural, right? Because you have an application, you've deployed it, you want to see people accessing your apps or whatever it may be. But I guess the little brother of ingress, of course, is egress. And what I find really interesting about Istio is it's almost as easy to configure egress as it is to configure ingress. At least there is a symmetry there, a similarity that's kind of you can what you learn in one domain can be applied to the other, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's a completely symmetrical concept, and you're absolutely right on your assessment of just maybe because of the nature of Kubernetes, we're all kind of gravitating towards, okay, I really like these new features that I'm getting through Kubernetes and now through Istio. How do I get in? But almost nobody starts thinking about how can I enforce or how can I play with the traffic when it goes out.
Right, right. So in that context, I was very, very happy to discover when a few weeks ago you wrote a blog entry on Tetrate's blog. And let me go ahead and put it up here on the screen. I have the link, by the way, is directly on our landing page. So for our listeners, you can just go to our landing page and find all of these links. But there it is. This is titled How to Enforce Egress Traffic Using Istio's Authorization Policies. And so not only did I learn a great deal by reading through this very highly technical and well explained blog entry, but then I decided, this would be a perfect sort of subject for us to have a conversation about. Why not have you on and explain a little bit of this to us? Yeah, let's discuss it. Tell us a little bit about what exactly is this article about.
Yeah, yeah. So if you think about it, most of the times, like we were discussing, we just think about, okay, how can we get our end users flow the just the traffic to our microservices, right, into our mesh, into our cluster. But when we start thinking about uh, the outbound traffic, most of the people just forget about it, and only until you kind of start assessing, security compliance and all of that, you start thinking about like how can we enforce certain policies. And traditionally, this usually just happened with other type of appliances like a firewall, right? And you can create your own rules and all of that. In the cloud, you have exactly the same accessibility of this type of features through, if you have GCP, AWS, or Azure, or you name it, each one of them, they have their own flavor of this is my firewall, and this is the way that you can actually use their specific API to implement these rules. And you even go further for specific customers that they have their own appliances, their own customized, right? Uh, if you think about it, the problem with this is you are getting into that specific vendor locking, right? You will have to go with this specific cloud provider, with this specific appliance.
Right.
So the idea behind this is like the same way that we want to abstract this layer and we don't want to have any dependency, and we just want to do it at the layer 7 and just do it with Istio. How can we do what is traditionally done in a firewall, like enforcing these policies on outbound traffic? How can we do it with Istio? That's pretty much where the question came.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Now, I admit when I first read it, I thought I understood it, but I understood it only superficially, and I had to go back to it a second time to really appreciate some of the subtlety in the process and to get a deeper understanding. And I know we have these slides that I'm going to go ahead and put them on the screen, and let's walk through it. And I think in the process we can explain more or less this whole mechanism of how this works and why you want to do things in certain ways and so on. So let me go ahead and add this and rewind here to slide number 1. Okay, so what we're looking at, for those of you who want to sort of really work through this and reproduce, that's what I love about these episodes. We get very technical, and you want to reproduce what Michael did. You begin, of course, by installing Istio in a very particular way to match the configuration we're talking about. So here, what we're looking at is a typical Istio installation configuration file, the Istio operator resource, where you want to make sure that you enable the egress gateway component. After all, that's what we're talking about, is egress. And so here what I did, and this is obviously many ways to do it. You can start with a default profile. You can start with a demo profile. It depends on the context. Here I use a default profile, and we enable the egress gateway. I guess that goes without say. But the next piece is rather interesting, this one right here. Michael, if my understanding is correct, this mode, registry only, is not a default. Like by default, any workload can call out to any service. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And just one quick thing before we move into that. What we're showing right here is if you wanted to set it up using the Istio operator API, which is the recommended way to install it, right? So for those who are familiar of how to install or upgrade Istio using the Istio operator, you can always create a resource like the one that we're showing right now. If you're not that familiar in how to use the Istio operator, you can always just do Istio cobble install, and you can just create something like use the demo profile, which already comes with an ingress and an egress. And for this specific variable that is called the outbound traffic policy, out of the box, it comes allow any. And pretty much what this means is that any sidecar within the mesh is going to be allowed to go to any external resource. So any sidecar who wants to flow outbound traffic, they will be able to reach it. When you actually change that value from allow any to registry only, you're telling Istio service mesh, you're not allowed to do that. We're only going to allow you to go to the host that we put in the registry. That's what it means.
Right. So by default, I guess any external URL like google.com or something is not going to be in your registry, because by default, only things that are discovered in your mesh are there. So we're going to have to do some more work to expose that. And then the other thing that I point out here, and this is by default in the demo profile, but not in the default profile, is to turn on access logging of your sidecars, which sort of help you trace some of these requests to make sure they actually go through an egress gateway.
Absolutely, yeah. You want to be able to tell the logs of all these components that are within your mesh, so you can trace the traffic. Right. So by enabling, Endpoints access logging, you're going to be able to see just by tailing the logs what's happening and how's the traffic flowing.
I suppose you could also do it in a maybe a more civilized way. If you turn on Kieli or something like that, you actually see the traffic.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to go further and use like any of the UI tools, probably that's going to be more visually appealing. For the time frame and kind of complexity of some of the things that we were doing, I just didn't want to incorporate
Yeah.
Another variable there.
Of course, yeah. Yeah. There's a limit to how much you can sort of cram into an article just to stay focused on the. So you've got this file, you do an Istio cuddle install, and you've got yourself obviously your sort of sandbox where you can actually experiment with this feature if your objective is to learn how it all works. So you've got this installed, and then the first thing to notice is that now if you have any sort of workload running in your mesh that is trying to call out to some external service, it won't work. So the next step, I suppose, is the one illustrated here. Can you walk us through what exactly we're doing here?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the Istio networking API, there's a resource called a service entry. And pretty much it does what the name says. What you're doing is you're creating an entry on the service registry. So this is the resource that now that your mesh is limited from allow any to registry only, this is the resource that you use to actually register the hosts that you want in this service entry, in the service registry list that Istio manages. And that's what is going to allow, or pretty much any of the sidecars to go out to this specific hosts. One thing that I want to point out that sometimes people forget about is this is a mechanism designed specifically to control traffic flow within a mesh. And why I'm saying this, because this is not exactly an enforcing type of agent or policy. And the reason is this, you are creating a configuration of how your sidecars should behave for outbound traffic, but nothing prevents someone, maybe a malicious agent, to actually hijack the topology that you have. As we know, the sidecar is just a container running next to your workload. If a malicious agent will to actually hijack this traffic and actually allow the actual workload to flow the outbound traffic, not through the sidecar,
Right.
then you will be exposed, right? So this shouldn't be looked as because I'm actually configuring my mesh, the outbound traffic policy for registry only, that I'm absolutely blocking anything.
I
It's
see.
actually
Yeah.
advised if you go into the Istio documentation and all of that, it is advised that you actually kind of join or bind this with some Kubernetes network policies, right? So
Yes.
you can just say something like, hey, I'm creating a Kubernetes network policy that's just going to say, hey, my workload,
Right.
it's only allowed to go to my sidecar or something like that. Or,
Gotcha.
you block it on that end.
Okay, so I looked at the reference for the service entry resource, and there's this location field, and you can actually specify that this service is actually external to your mesh, and there's a specific sort of enum constant called mesh external that you would add to this YAML. Then you apply the service entry, and lo and behold, your service now can call out to this particular URL. We just decided to pick developers.google.com. I think that's what was in your article. I think there are a couple of endpoints that you play with. So this is the picture we have now. The egress gateway is not yet in this picture. And what I learned and what I loved about, but there's actually the Istio docs also point this out, is even here there's benefits in that you can actually start defining a virtual service to configure exactly many of the things that you are used to or habituated to configure in a sidecar, like timeout. You could say, if I don't get a response within a certain amount of time, I can time it out. You can do retries. You can, I suppose, mirror traffic if you want to, and all of the other sort of goodies that come with a virtual service. So here's an example for it, and this is, I think, straight out of the docs.
Yeah.
Where you're basically saying, okay, I'm gonna have a timeout of 3 seconds on this particular destination. Okay,
This is really interesting, like you said. Just think about on the use case, right? Most of the times for outbound traffic, before it gets to your appliance that is enforcing any type of rules, you will have to create something. If your appliance doesn't have something like a mirror or retry or things like that, right? You will have to customize this. by
Right.
just doing that entry of external to the mesh, pretty much you're telling the service mesh that that external service, developers.google.com, just behaves like any other service within the mesh. And that's why you can just create a virtual service and take advantage of these features.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. All right, so the next step, right? And I love how everything sort of layers on. You comprehend this, you go to the next step. What we really want here is, where's the egress gateway? We want to funnel traffic, maybe something like this picture. We want everything that goes outside the mesh to go through some kind of intermediary. In our case, it's the egress gateway. And I guess we can talk about, why we might want to do that. I think there's some very good reasons, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just so the reasoning behind this is, as when we were describing the typical topology of a service mesh, right? You have all your sidecars, and out of the box they're talking to each other, right? And then at the edge you have your ingress and your egress, right?
Yeah.
Then you want to create a topology where you have a centralized point where you can enforce policies, right? If you just leave it to the previous step where you are just enforcing at the sidecar level going out, meaning the outbound traffic going out there, then you will have to enforce that in all the sidecars of your mesh. So we're talking about, if we have a potential number of applications, then you will have to do that for all of them, even if we're talking about the same host. So let's say if we want to deny everybody to just go to developers.google.com, there are ways to do it, but then you will have to go and pretty much deny it on each one of those namespaces. The idea here is instead, hey, let's create something that it's actually going to funnel, is going to just shape all this outbound traffic from all the sidecars to the egress, so we can enforce this at the egress or where the egress lives.
Yeah. All right, and so not the remainder. Actually, there are two more parts in your article, but the next phase you go into is explain exactly how to achieve this, how to configure this, and there, I think, two alternative configurations you show. And here, I think I highlight only one: the idea of piggybacking on Istio itself. That is, you don't have to put any smarts in your application. The application can just call out HTTP and let the sidecar upgrade that communication to mutual TLS all the way to the egress gateway. And obviously, if the target URL is HTTPS, using simple TLS the rest of the way. And then you explain how to actually do that, which I thought was very interesting for a number of reasons. Maybe the main one is because we use the same. If you've done egress configuration, you're familiar with gateway, destination rule, and virtual service, but it's kind of flipped, it's mirrored, so to speak.
It's exactly what you said. It's a symmetrical concept. So when you do ingress, you configure your ingress through a gateway resource, and then you actually start using the features of binding your virtual service through your gateway and using the destination rules depending on your use case. And that's exactly the same that we're doing here, but instead it's just outbound traffic.
Yeah. Now, in the process, I learned, I didn't really know that there was a term called TLS origination, which is the flip side of TLS termination, right? Which
exactly.
is the idea. Yeah, okay. The idea is you begin your TLS connection, in this case, from the egress gateway.
So exactly. And
yeah.
Sorry. I mean, didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I actually wanted to hear your point of view on it.
I was going to say, it really makes sense for the use case. If you think about, if we were to access something like developers.google.com, probably for the use case, we just want to rely on Istio, right? Because we just want our application to just do regular HTTP. Then we don't want to have to deal with anything else. We just let Istio out of the box to say, hey, between the sidecar and my egress, we're just going to rely on Istio out of the box and TLS. But then on the egress, you're just going to do simple TLS out. But what if instead of developers.google.com, it's actually another service, a private service that is in another cluster, another mesh, or something like that, that you actually want to also maintain a mutual TLS, and you want to originate all of that from your workload, on your pod, then that changes a little bit, because then you want to make sure you're doing the TLS origination all the way from your workload, from the application container. And you don't want Istio to get in the way with the out-of-the-box MTLS. Instead, just pass through and then make sure that it goes all the way out through the egress. That way you can do the mutual TLS. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, and that actually reminds me of the fact that when you read through the documentation, there are different TLS modes you can pick. One is called pass-through. The other one is called, I think, Istio mutual. We'll see them in just a minute. Okay, so the first sort of bit of YAML. This looks a little bit scary, but once I thought about it, this made a lot of sense to me. There's two parts I want to call out. So we're looking at a virtual service. And I'm going to go ahead and put these little callouts on the screen so you can see. But there's really two sections here. What we're saying, well, maybe you can explain it better than I can.
Yeah. So just a quick refresher. As we said, you have an ingress, you have an egress. The way that you configure your instances, your ingress or egress instances, is through a gateway. So then after you create your gateway resource, the way that you actually start using the features and shaping the traffic or whatever it is that you want to do, you actually bound that through a virtual service that is binded to the gateway. In this particular case, as you can see on line 10, we're saying, hey, by the way, this is my virtual service for the Google, but for developers at google.com. But it's binded to two gateways, which is the Istio egress gateway and the mesh gateway. And at that portion where you have the brackets on, it's actually matching each one of the gateways. So one is our actual egress gateway at the edge, and the other one is the mesh gateway, which is something that you don't usually see, but is referred to the actual gateway that goes between the sidecars. So when you want to control something of just within the sidecars, you just talk to the mesh. And that's pretty much what it's doing. And if you look into the actual route destination, it's matching for that mesh gateway, and it's saying for this subset that is Google on port 80, please send it to my Istio egress gateway. So that's pretty much the portion that actually shapes the traffic from the sidecar to the egress gateway when you try to go from your workload to developers.google.com. The other part is the actual egress gateway, right? When that traffic gets there, it's actually going to the actual destination of developers.google.com, and you can see there the port is 443 because it's just going to do simple TLS there.
Yeah. Okay, so then the next piece of the puzzle is how do you configure that last leg going out to developers.google.com to use simple TLS, and that's done with this bit of YAML. So this is a destination rule for developers.google.com. And notice that I guess it says TLS mode simple, which basically means one-way TLS in this particular case. So that's easy for me to wrap my head around. The last two YAMLs was a little more difficult. I might need your help to actually understand. So finally, I'm showing the gateway resource on the left. Notice the selector. That's easy. If you've done any ingress, it's the same sort of idea. You use a selector to match the actual egress gateway deployment, which is Istio : on line 8 there. And then there's a servers field that basically, and the list of servers are the ones going out. Not, with ingress, usually it's a list of, targets inside your mesh. These are targets outside your mesh. But notice that the TLS mode there is Istio mutual, which I guess means that people talking to the gateway are going to be using Istio mutual.
Exactly. So you're configuring your egress gateway with this gateway resource for when you're actually going to the host developers.google.com, but you want to say, hey, I want to rely on Istio mutual mode, which is Istio is going to use their own certs out of the box to actually do mutual TLS between the sidecars and the egress. And that's why the destination rule is also saying, by the way, the TLS mode is Istio mutual. And he's doing an extra step that is doing Istio mutual for the SNI developers at google.com.
Yes. Yeah. So you have the gateway on the left, and on the right, the destination rule that specifies the SNI and defines. So I can imagine how, because everything goes through the egress gateway, there might be multiple destinations, and each one is modeled as a subset, which I thought was also very interesting, so that you can
Yep.
discriminate between them, I guess.
Yeah, I'm more used to the kind of using subsets and destination rules. I do know there's like the other side of the coin of people that they don't like to use destination rules and they're more well versed in just using several virtual services. That's another way that you can
I
also
see.
do it. Destination rules are on virtual services are really flexible, and as long as you understand this concept, then you can play with them and achieve the same result.
Gotcha. All right. So once you have all these YAMLs in place, you essentially have that picture we were looking at earlier, where everything is configured. And I think now we finally get to the point you were trying to make in your article, which is that you can use the Istio authorization policy custom resource to actually define what your policy is, like who is allowed to call this guy based on various little levers, I guess is what I would call them.
Exactly, because you want to get to that point like, okay, how can I enforce policies and access my principles, right? And the whole thing is like you just don't want to create a policy that is gonna be at a segregation level that it doesn't fit the topology or the architecture of your design, right? You want to be able to create policies all the way from the whole mesh to the namespaces to the actual workloads, right? And that's the point that we're trying to do here, right? We're relying on the authorization policy resource from Istio to actually enforce these actions, but we're matching a specific SNI keys, right, which is developers.google.com, and matching it with the specific source principles that happen to be the service accounts on this specific
Yeah.
workloads, right?
Yeah. This is just an example. I know in your article you show multiple different types of authorization policies. And I guess for the benefit of completeness, SNI is the server name indicator,
Yeah.
which is a way of sort of extrapolating from an HTTPS request, the TLS request, the actual server name that you're making the request to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So this is wonderful. So what I urge our audience to do is to go and check out your blog and read this. Now this is accompanied by a GitHub repo. I think you link to it here somewhere, where all of your artifacts, all of the examples, the YAML files can be obviously obtained and downloaded, and so that people can actually go through this on their own.
Yep.
Okay.
And you can find it right there. It's just a regular GitHub repo. Yeah, and it's also at the end.
Okay.
It's a little bit lengthy, but we're trying to go from all the way from the simple way of just relying on Istio out of the box MTLS to actually go to the more complicated case of I don't want to rely on Istio out of the box MTLS, and I actually want to do HTTPS out of my workload in case you need it.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So I'm really curious to ask you. I mean, nothing comes out of a vacuum, so to speak. There's always context. What was the catalyst that got you to really dig into how this is done? Was this a client request? Were they trying to configure it for themselves? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, it was through a customer request. And I think a lot of these concepts, when you're just talking about Ingress or some of the features that Istio brings to the table, the use cases are extrapolated in a really straightforward way, right? One to one, you can match it. But when it comes out to outbound traffic, it is not there. And then only when you start thinking, okay, this is nice. I already did everything that I wanted to get my traffic in, but now I want to enforce it out. How can I do that? And specifically, what I said, uh, customers who have been already playing with Istio and Kubernetes, and they actually start exploring all these solutions out there, right? Like I know there's called Kyverno and a different type of policy management. You're like, okay, you know what? I want to abstract my outbound rules, my outbound traffic, like I used to do on a regular firewall, right? The same way that we're abstracting all these features, on L2, L3, I want to abstract them, when it's going out, like I do with firewall rules. So how can I do that? And that's when I start digging in, and I found a great deal of information on the Istio that I upstream documentation, but I also found that there was not a lot of documentation with a specific use cases, like specifically like at the end of the article, I talk about what if you actually have two workloads on the same namespace and you actually want to enforce my
Right.
A workload, it's allowed to go to Google, but not to Yahoo. And my B workload is allowed to go to Yahoo, but not to Google. That's a super typical use case that you will try to solve with regular firewall rules, right?
Yep. 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 Yeah. I have to say, I you're the second person I'm interviewing who comes from the customer success team, and so I think about the role you play. Obviously, you interface with clients, something I personally in my role do a little bit less of, but I'm trying to get out there. And I was wondering, are there other interesting situations that maybe you can relate to whoever's watching us in terms of a problem that sort of presented itself and that maybe Tetrate was able to really assist the customer and help them in some way with their whatever they may have been grappling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are several of them, right? Like that's the number one ask when a customer, start like getting more mature in their service mesh journey. I think they get to a point, okay, you know what, this is more complex. I need someone to help me out, and that's where we come in. There are several instances, but I will say that one that it has been recent and really got my attention, I really enjoy. We really helped a particular customer reduce significant costs in their operations. I will say about 20%. By just
Wow.
leveraging Tetrate's ability of actually create ARM releases, we were able to quickly create a specific Istio images for ARM for being used with AWS Gravitron, I think they're called,
Yeah.
in AWS, and it was a more than just creating the images, right? The whole objective for the customer was like, look, we're doing all of this, but this is getting out of hand in terms of cost. So we went as a team and we actually analyzed all the possible edges we can actually attack. And there were several improvements that get to this 20%. It was not only the images, I can tell you, we actually tailor all the way you can actually manage your metrics out of the endpoints. So there is a particular way that you can just limit the amount of metrics. There are specific production ready configuration that you will do in things like Prometheus to aggregate the metrics in certain ways to just with the objective to reduce network I/O. So just think about it. Just moving to these images is going to give you a better performance cost relationship, right? Between memory and
Right.
CPU, optimizing the network I/O, right? We did things like using the sidecar resource that is not, usually you don't
Right.
see a lot of people talking about it, right? A sidecar resource, and we actually analyze how they were supposed to, the different sidecars talked with the control planes. And this actually also reduces a lot of memory consumption and network I/O. I think I have another writing out there, something talking about the sidecar.
Mhm.
So there are different, approaches like this that we as a team at Tetrate, we just get together and work as a team and try to, help the customer on get to that point. So I think that's really exciting. That really tells the customer, okay, we are really talking with people who is experts on service mesh.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I had forgotten about that. I'm glad you bring that up. So while you were explaining this, I went ahead and found I recall there was a blog entry that Tetrate wrote. I guess this must have been the outcome of that engagement you talked about, where we were
That's
able to
correct.
then, I see, okay, to add support for ARM architectures in Istio, and there's the blog write up. So maybe I'll grab the link and add it to our
Yeah, just
landing
think about
page.
it. It's not every day that you can just go to any company and just say like, "Hey, I don't like your images. I actually need this specific," and they're gonna tell you, "Okay," and it's such a turnaround, just get it done, right? That I think that speak loud of the capability and what Tetrate brings to the table, right?
I agree. I'm always very impressed by, yeah, like you say, the caliber of expertise and the willingness, combined with the willingness to be to have the humility to say, okay, let's figure it out together. Let's get to a better place. I love that. And that I like to always, I don't know why, it's a habit I have to extrapolate from an example into a general theme, which is not always, doesn't always work. But what I'm coming to realize is when I reflect on my journey of learning Istio obviously is a very important first step. But then when companies decide, okay, we're going to go to the next step and start to deploy this to our environments and build experience with it and operationalize it, that is also a fascinating phase where you have to, I mean, you're no longer in the sandbox, right? You've got to version control things, you've got to
Yeah.
set up multiple environments, you can't just like bootstrap the add-ons like we typically do in our workshops. For example, you have to install Prometheus and Grafana in a proper way, and Kiali and so on, and then really look to those monitoring tools to give you the feedback you need to determine, how to maybe performance tune everything, and that becomes a journey unto itself.
Yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
exactly. Yeah. That's really exciting.
Yeah, that's something that I'm gonna have to try to find a way to insert myself into, because I find that terribly exciting. Um, on to my next question, and this is something I asked your colleague last week, Lee. Um, what, in your opinion, are the most challenging aspects of your role at Tetrate?
Um, I will say it's not as specific to Tetrate. I think it's just specific to being part of an organization that is trying to achieve customer success and is being able to properly abstract the real need, right? Sometimes is challenging to depict that picture of why you want to steer the customer in a certain direction, right? So it does take a certain level of skills and information flowing and communication to actually be able to get to that point that you really understand what are the customer struggles so you can help them out. So I always think that uh, I'm not that concerned about the technical challenges because we are working with such talented people and technology is evolving so fast that every time you kind of find a roadblock, there are ways to kind of overcome it and work around it, right? I think it's more challenging making sure that you're abstracting the proper needs and making sure you have a proper communication flow. That way, you just get to a successful outcome. And that's something that I think we're all trying to get better and improve every single day.
Yeah, for sure. This definitely for me brings back memories. I in the past life was a consultant at ThoughtWorks, where we oftentimes found ourselves in front of customers, ferreting out, like you said, this wasn't a technical problem or of a communication a problem, trying to understand the customer better so that we could help them in the right way, rather
Exactly.
than just jumping in and starting to code or whatever might be the issue.
That's right.
Okay, so the flip side of that question is, what is the most rewarding part of your job at Tetra?
Um, I think the most rewarding part is really when customers just feel encouraged to just go back to other customers or to other people out there in the community, or even with other Tetrans, and say, hey, this guy really helped me out. I had this problem. I run it by him. He figured out a solution, and it doesn't necessarily, like I said before, has to be a technical solution. It's just a point of view, an actual improvement to just make their lives easier. So I think that's the most rewarding part, at least for me. Be hearing from project managers or other people at Tetrate or outside saying like, "Hey, this really helped me out." I think that's the most rewarding part.
Yeah, yeah, I can relate.
Mhm.
And while we were chatting, there was a message in the comments about just feedback from your blog that this individual, Nadedla Kishore, mentioned that they felt this was a great blog that really shows how to set things up with a fine-grained authorization policy. Thank you so much for posting the message. Yeah, when you get to a point, and it's hard to where your customer thinks of you as just an extension of their team, that's got to be very gratifying, I'm sure.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot one more time, and I wanted to sort of publicly give you my congratulations. I just happened to know that you took the Istio certification exam not that long ago, maybe a week or less, and passed it, of course. And I think it's wonderful. So congrats on passing the exam.
Thank you.
We oftentimes, it's part of my job to obviously let the community know about the certification. And so I want you to share, if possible, what is your advice, your wisdom for somebody who's maybe in the process of preparing? What should they look out for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely the starting point should be not only the Istio docs, but I think we have a fantastic a program called Istio Foundations, and that we offer. It's a really, really good starting point. It really touches a lot of the features and main concepts that you need to be aware when you're talking about service mesh. And honestly, besides that, it's just playing with it, trying it out, getting familiar with what are the main concepts, in terms of security, traffic shaping, familiar with some of the features that we offer for observability, and I think that's it. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's the Istio fundamentals course we have on our academy. I'm going to flash the URL one more time on the screen. And for those of you who are contemplating taking the certification exam, we'd like to extend also a 30% off coupon code. So there it is on your screen.
And also, if you kind of feel like I don't have a lot of time to actually engage into a course like Istio Foundations, we usually, I don't know how often, but we also run an Istio 0 to 60. I did one some months ago. That's, I would say, is the perfect spot for someone who might be not sure that wants to get the cert, but it's definitely sure that person wants to learn more about service mesh. I think that's the great spot to just start the Istio 0 to 60.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's something I sort of failed to do in a couple of past episodes. So these are the workshops we run, the 0 to 60 workshop, and Michael has run some of those workshops in the past as well. That was terrific. All right. Well, this brings our episode to a close. Michael, I want to say thank you so much for joining us and sharing your know-how with us and telling us a little bit about what your job is like. That is exactly the purpose of these Tetrand profile episodes that we do. And I'm going to close in the usual fashion. Maybe I will have you stick around with me as I sort of go through this. So I have put on our landing page for this episode all of the links that pertain to what we discussed, from Michael's blog entry here, how to enforce egress traffic, to specific references in the documentation. So there's a number of tasks for egress that you should check out, maybe that complement the blog entry. Also a reference to the authorization policy configuration, and maybe more specifically this long list of conditions that I didn't know about some of them because there's just so much detail. But that's another bad one to peruse as well. So that's the documentation. If you're more curious about the whole subject of operationalizing Istio, I feel like we're going to have to make an episode out of that. But if you're curious to really get more into that, I put a few links in there, and I'm going to spare you the details and let you explore those on your own. And we'll also have to do another episode where I really want to talk about Tetrate's offerings for our clients, from an Istio subscription to our FIPS certified Istio distribution to our flagship product, the Tetrate Service Bridge, and so on. And to let you know that what's coming up ahead. So the plan is to take a little bit of a summer break. We are probably going to skip a few weeks as we go into the summer. And we plan to be back on August 12th, where we're going to do a part 2 of our series, Learning Istio from the Inside, where we're going to try to get Aditya to come back and demonstrate working with Istio code base. It'll be a totally different flavor type episode, which hopefully some of you will enjoy. We've discussed certification, and then finally, I'd like to close by inviting all of you to, if you haven't already joined Tetrate's community Slack organization, the invite URL is right there, and we hope to see you there. If you have questions, or if you want to learn more about our workshops or certification program, and etc. All right, well, thanks everybody. This concludes another episode 15 of Tetrate Tech Talks, and we'll see you in our next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.